Hello and welcome to Nucleus Shortcuts, Volume 10. If you missed earlier episodes, not to worry. You can find them at our blog at nucleussec.com/blog and also on our YouTube channel. And also be sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. We're at Nucleus Sec, and you can find us and follow us there. So I'm your host, Adam Dudley, and our topic today is the 4 golden metrics in vulnerability management. And generally, being able to track the metrics that matter is essential to having an effective and mature vulnerability management program. And I picked this topic because our guest today wrote an ebook by the same name, which has been very popular with our customers and the security community in general. So joining me today is Dave Farquhar. And if you've been watching the show for a while, Dave will be a familiar face to you. But if not, here's what you need to know basically about Dave. He's a solutions architect here at Nucleus that onboards new customers and users to the platform. And perhaps more importantly, he's had a very long career in security and vulnerability management more specifically. So he is definitely one of our go-to in-house experts here. I have personally learned a lot from Dave and the time we've been working together. So, and he's also generous with his time and insight. So, thank you, Dave, for that. And would you like to add to your intro there?
Yeah, hi Adam, thanks. My name is Dave, and I remediated 800,000 vulnerabilities in my career as a system administrator. Then I became a security analyst, and then I helped other system administrators drop their vulnerability counts by 75%. Today, we're going to talk about what's wrong with what I just said.
Nice. And we still need to get you that T-shirt, Dave, that you remediated 800,000 vulnerabilities.
And all I got was this lousy t-shirt.
Exactly.
That's about what it's worth.
Well, awesome. Thanks for
We'll
being
talk
here,
about why
Dave.
that is.
Sounds good. And would you please kick us off with just a brief take from a vulnerability management perspective on why selecting and tracking the right metrics is so important?
Yeah, the goal of your security policy is to make sure that you're patching the right things and you're patching them fast enough.
Hmm.
Nice and simple, right?
Right.
The way that usually reads is when a new vulnerability comes out, if it meets a certain criteria, it has this deadline. So if it's a critical vulnerability, it has a tight deadline. If it's high, it has a slightly less tight deadline,
Hmm.
usually. Medium and low have a much looser deadline, generally speaking. That's typically the way the threat and vulnerability management portion of an information security policy is written. Now, if you don't have one of those on your next success call with us or open a support case, we can send you one. We can send you a sample policy that you can then adapt to your own needs. The classic problem in threat and vulnerability management has been reporting how well remediation teams are carrying out that policy. Frequently, the remediation teams don't see any connection between what the policy asks them to do and what the metrics that they're being judged against say. Good metrics measure your performance and they tell you what you need to change to get a better result next month. I've lost count of the number of security teams I've worked with over the years who don't know if their remediation teams are doing a good job or a bad job. And the danger is that you conclude that the teams are doing a bad job when they're actually doing really well. And then they change their program and they make things worse. And so I'll tell you a sad story. I was talking with someone at a previous job. I was doing a health check on their VM program. And this person blurted out how many vulnerabilities that his company had. And you should have heard the way that he said it. He hesitated, and I could hear the fear in his voice. And so then what I did was I asked him a couple of questions so that I could work backwards and estimate the vulnerabilities or the metrics that we're going to check here. And based on how he answered those questions, I concluded that you're not doing bad at all. Actually, you're doing pretty well. That count that is scaring you is something that I would probably actually be glad to have. So I don't know what is more sad than doing a good job and thinking that you're doing a bad job.
Sure.
Now, I was able to work backward from this because I've been tracking this stuff for 20 years. Now, if you use the right metrics, you can come to the same conclusion that I did without having to have that 20 years of experience to get it, because not everybody has that.
Right.
Mark Twain said once that there are lies, damned lies, in statistics. The problem with statistics sometimes is you can accidentally lie to yourself with them if you don't understand what it is that they mean. Now, you can intentionally misuse them too, but in the workplace, most of what I see is people accidentally misusing them
Mm,
rather than being malicious about it. And so
interesting.
the right metrics are going to help you to figure out quickly if your program is actually regressing or if you had a bad month due to factors that were beyond your control. Then you can adjust and have a better month next month.
Got it. So if I'm hearing it right, so it seems like there's a big obstacle here with having an effective vulnerability management program is that some teams don't even know how to measure how well they're doing. So they're, I assume, taking a lot of random action and not knowing if it's moving the needle in the right direction or not.
Right.
I can I haven't done the work of vulnerability management, but I can just imagine how frustrating that might be.
It's incredibly frustrating. And that's why you
Yeah.
see such turnover in this field.
Right. And you talked about how, someone determines inaccurately that the team is doing badly, and then they revamp the whole program. Is that by chance a byproduct of uh, I don't know, someone new coming in at the leadership or management level that doesn't necessarily know how to assess how the program's doing, or how does that occur? Who changes up the program in those
Most
cases?
most frequently it is there's been a change. So it could be at the director level or it could be a new analyst coming in.
Okay,
Um, that's most typically when it happens, but
got it.
sometimes someone's been there a year or so, they got a bad review.
I see.
So then they make changes to try to get a better review next year. It's
Got it.
triggered by something,
Yeah.
usually, but the result frequently ends up not being what they were looking for because
Right.
the yeah, well,
Yeah.
uh, yeah,
They're
they're
yeah.
the blind leading the blind. Classic case of
Right.
that.
Good analogy. So, and I had to point out that you mentioned, Mark Twain's quote about damn lies and statistics. And I couldn't help but remember there's a book out there that some of the audience might be curious about. I think it's pretty old by now, but it's called How to Lie with Statistics. Um, might be of interest to some folks. Great. So now getting into the meat of our topic. So taking Nucleus off the table, forgetting it exists for the moment. I'm very curious to know, how do vulnerability management teams typically go about assembling and tracking these metrics without, an aggregation and analysis platform like Nucleus? And, if the old way isn't ideal, why not?
The old way is definitely not ideal. This is a really important question. Traditionally, teams use Excel to do this. So what they'll do is they'll take the scan results, maybe two sets of scan results, run some sums, maybe some averages. If the data sets are small enough, they'll make some pivot tables. But you can really only analyze a million vulnerabilities at a time because Excel has 1.04 million rows because
Okay.
of binary reasons that
Hmm.
make sense if you know how to count in binary. Um, and in a large enterprise environment that may have hundreds of thousands of systems, a million rows doesn't go very far.
Right.
Now, this is the reason that vulnerability counts are so popular. It's the easiest thing to measure, and especially if you have a huge data set, you can still measure it, even if you can't load the whole thing into Excel.
Right.
Then everyone has their own ideas what else to measure from there, but it's generally based on the limits of the data that you have available and the tool's ability to measure that. So what you come up with hopefully makes sense to the person who came up with it. At least yeah. But relating that metric back to the original purpose, am I patching the right things? Am I patching them fast enough? Might not necessarily be clear how to get there from there or how to get there from here.
Got it.
The key to succeeding when you have Nucleus is to think beyond what you used to do in Excel. You don't have that limit of a million rows at a time anymore. And you don't have a limit to the number of scans that you can look at anymore. So you're able to analyze a much bigger data set with much greater fidelity and measure things that are not practical to measure in Excel.
Got it. So it sounds to me like a big part of vulnerability management, because you have so much vulnerability data and so many scanners producing that vulnerability data. Um, a big part of success here is wrangling the data effectively. And Excel is clearly not the most effective way to do that because there's so much of the data.
Right.
Um, I mean, to me, it sounds virtually impossible to do without first aggregating the data from all the different sources into one central location where you can actually, as you said, analyze it and slice and dice it in whatever fidelity you need to look at it. And
Yeah, it's
um,
painful.
right. Um, so I thought we'd have you, Dave, jump into a quick walkthrough of how some of our users are using Nucleus to track the key metrics in a way that's much better than Excel.
Yeah, definitely.
Nice. All right, Dave's going to bring up his screen here. I can see your screen. Looks good.
Okay. So the first thing that we need to do is go to asset management. So we go assets, asset management. We
Hmm.
want to take a look at the scan coverage. This tells me how fresh or how stale or how complete or incomplete the data is. Are you scanning all of the systems that are in your asset inventory? Right here, this is bad. So this is not what good looks like.
Okay.
Um,
Want to see more green, right, Dave?
yes,
Okay.
in a successful program, I want to see like 90% or
Okay.
more here, not 45. 45 is
Got
bad.
it.
The fresher and the more complete that your data is, the more you can trust it, and the more everybody else who's looking at it is going to trust it. If it's only a matter of time before the remediation team says things like, well, you didn't scan the good part of my network, or, well, you missed my remediation window. That's why this looks bad. And you don't have any way to refute it. It works once, they can continue saying that whether it's true or not, and you don't have a leg to stand on as far as proving that they're right or they're wrong.
Okay.
So next, let's look at the project dashboard and the project risk score. So what's a good risk score? Very common question, very good question. 399, that's low. If your score is 300, we're done here. Almost. 699, believe it or not, is medium. Now, 699 seems pretty high, but
Yeah.
even getting to 699 is an achievement. As you can see, we're not too far from there. So this helps me to answer that question, are you patching the right things?
Okay.
If your score is in the 300s, you're patching the highest severity things to get into the 300s. And this is an average, but it's a weighted average. So those high severity vulnerabilities count more than the low ones do. That allows your systems with a score of 0 to not act to there are two things you can do with scores of 0. You can not count them at all, in which case if you go and you patch an asset at a time and clean it up, your
Hmm.
score can actually go up, which punishes you for doing the right thing.
Okay.
Or you can weight the zeros a little bit less than the 1000s. Then they both count. Then as your thousands drop off, your score drops, but it doesn't punish you for the methodology. Sometimes it's easier to clean up a system at a time. Sometimes it's easier to clean up a vulnerability at a time. Using the weighted average allows you to pick either one and not be punished for that, for which methodology works better for you.
Got it. And also to be clear, Dave, just for the potential non-Nucleus users watching this, the maximum risk score is 1,000, correct?
Yes, correct.
Right. And just to be, for customers and non-customers alike, we have detailed documentation on how our risk scoring works and is calculated. It's all transparent. We make it transparent for the user, and we expose all the details of how it's calculated. So there's uh, no opaqueness to it.
Right. We don't want this to seem like black magic.
Right.
You need to understand the rules of the game.
That's right.
So the next thing that we want to do is go to vulnerabilities and trends. And we're going to spend a lot of time here on this screen.
Okay.
So average vulnerability lifetime right here. This is 27 days. And if we scroll down here, we see 27 days on the average. This is average unique vulnerability. So how long it takes for me on average to fix every instance of a vulnerability versus how long it takes for me to fix any vulnerability, regardless of whether I've fixed it partially or fixed the entire thing.
Okay.
So when I'm talking network security, this is a little bit more useful. This tends to be a little bit better measure of the work involved because I can deploy an update to one system, two systems, or 1,000 systems with about the same level of effort. When we're talking application security, each one of these is a unit of work.
Right.
So this works a little bit better well, definitely works better for application security. For network security, a lot of times they'll want to use this one.
Okay.
So policy typically is going to be, I want to fix a critical in some length of time, probably less than 30 days. So here, I'm fixing vulnerabilities in 27 days on average. That's pretty good. Now, I would like to see this number not be 56. You're supposed to be fixing criticals faster than highs and mediums. 5 days on highs, that's impressive. 39 days on mediums, why are we fixing mediums faster than we're fixing criticals? That tells me we need to reprioritize.
Okay.
So that kind of nuance can be helpful sometimes. But overall, if I've got a good risk score, yeah, in the 300s or
Hmm.
even around 500, and this number is within policy, which 30 days is fairly standard, you've got a functioning VM program. Now, there are adjustments you could make. Certainly, fixing a criticals faster would make this a more effective VM program, but it is difficult to argue that now, and this data is contrived. So, and you can tell because all of this is flat, and yet but if this were real data where there was movement up here,
Hmm.
and these other numbers were, had a risk score that was getting close to the 600s and an average vulnerability lifetime of 27, okay, I can work with this.
Okay.
Now, the other question comes down to, let's say I've got I'm fixing vulnerabilities pretty fast within 27 days. Why is my risk score 706? It should be better than that if I am complying with my policy. So why is that score as high as it is? Take a look at these numbers that are flanking that. The
Hmm.
vulnerabilities discovered and the vulnerabilities remediated. So if I've got a gap here, and this works better with a large data set.
Hmm.
But if I've got a large gap between the total vulnerabilities remediated and discovered, it tells me I've still got a backlog.
Right.
So I can game the system by only deploying this month's updates. I'm going to have a really good average vulnerability lifetime,
Hmm.
but I'll have a backlog. So my risk score can continue to increase even though I have a really good
Okay.
lifetime. So I need to be addressing not just the new things, but also the existing things. These two numbers don't have a large gap. Like this is over a 50% gap
Hmm.
between the two.
Right.
So if I've got a fairly small gap between those two, and this vulnerability lifetime is good, and my risk score is bad, that tells me it's a temporary condition. I'm doing the right things. Something new has come out. As soon as I get that done, that's going to come, that risk score is going to fall back down. So, case in point, October 2008. That particular month, there was a very notorious vulnerability that was discovered, MSO 8067. It's one of
Okay.
the classics. It was the log4j of its era.
Okay.
That vulnerability came out, the patch came out, and I didn't think anything of it. So, well, yeah, my policy is I got to get this thing done in X period of time. We deploy it to test, have it bake in the lab for a couple of weeks, no problems. All right, I'll blast this thing out to my network. Took me a week to deploy it. So 21 days, I've started deploying it. So by the end of you know, by the end of my cycle, which would have been about 30 days after Patch Tuesday, that was completely remediated. So was everything else from that month. So if you looked at my Nucleus score, if I'd had Nucleus in 2008, my risk score would have been 0 the day before Patch Tuesday because I had a completely clean scan.
Hmm.
Would have jumped to over 900 because of MSO 8067 coming out.
Right.
Would have started to drop 3 weeks in. So day 21, that number would have started to drop, and it would have been kind of a weird drop because of my reboots and when my reboots were happening and all that. But by day 30, my risk score would have been back down to 0 again.
Okay.
So that volatility didn't matter. I couldn't control that MSO 8067 came out. I could control how quickly I fixed it, and I fixed it within 3 days or within 3 weeks.
Got it.
So we just looked at the global level here. The
Right.
other thing that you can do, you can use the asset filter. And oh, I had a filter on here already. So I
Hmm.
was looking at a managing director of James Adams. So let's take that off and apply that filter. Take a look here. Okay, this is different.
Much different.
This is much different. So what I see here, our friend Patrick Gray has talked about putting an org chart on your vulnerability data so you can see who's slacking off. James Adams isn't slacking off. He's doing a pretty good job.
Hmm.
so, so having that filter on, let me pull him back up again. So we see 20, we went from 149 to 27, and
Hmm.
this was 511 to 27. So James Adams is doing a good job. Don't beat him up this month.
Don't break out the stick.
Right. So what we see here is when we compare a certain group, one group against the whole, then you can see by definition, half of your teams are above average and half of them are below average.
Hmm.
So this will help you to figure out, okay, who's above average, who's not, who's functioning and who's not. So right here, that whole thing about, hey, why is my risk score not good? I've got 34 vulnerabilities remediated, 275 discovered. So that is a big delta.
Yep.
We've got a 90% almost a 90% difference here between these two. So important thing is make sure you're looking at what you think you're looking at. like what I just did, but then know that, hey, you can drill down and you can compare different groups against each other. Just make sure that you don't forget that you had a filter on.
Right. Got it. Okay, Dave. I think for time, this was the we can conclude this section here, but this was awesome. Thank you so much. And before we wrap, is there any particular thing, most important thing you want folks to take away from what we've talked about here today?
Yeah, the most important thing, I think, tell you another quick story. At my previous job, we were onboarding a new customer, and that customer asked us to measure a certain metric for them. And it was something that wasn't at all easy to measure, wasn't something that Nucleus even looks at, it
Hmm.
wasn't anything that any tool out there looks at.
Hmm.
And we couldn't figure out what the value of that was. And so we asked them why it was they wanted to use that particular metric. And they said, because that proves that my teams are working hard. And if you're getting good results, I don't care if you're working hard. Some of the greatest athletes of all time, that's why they're great, is they don't look like they're working hard. The worst thing you can say about a figure skater is it looks like they're working hard. They're not
Yeah,
supposed
right.
to look like they're working. They are working hard, but they're not supposed to look like they are. And when I was a system administrator, the I got word back about a year after that when I'd moved into security that my former boss had made a comment about whoever it was that replaced me, and my he said, "Well, Dave never seemed to have any trouble patching." He doesn't remember me for working hard. It's exactly, and I'll tell you, it's the opposite. He hated how I scripted things and all that, and I had things automated because he didn't understand it and he couldn't control it. So
Right.
he hated that, except for the results. When he wasn't getting the results anymore, he missed it when it was gone.
Sure.
Now, let's say you are working hard and you don't have the results to show for your hard work. In 5 minutes, you can use Nucleus to figure out why it is you're not getting those results that you want, even though you're working hard. And then you can redirect that effort toward the things that are going to give you the result that you need, that you want. If your teams know how you're being measured and that what you're measuring aligns with the security policy and how it aligns with the security policy, then they understand the rules of the game. And when you're not changing the rules of the game on them every month, they're a whole lot more likely to follow through. And then everybody is going to be more effective and more happy.
Excellent, Dave. Great final thoughts. And thank you so much for joining us today. And we'll share any relevant links in the show notes, including how you can get a demo or free trial of Nucleus. And we look forward to seeing you soon on Nucleus Shortcuts. Bye, folks. Bye, Dave.